All right, so Unit 10.2, Part 3. And so we left off with Germany invading Poland, and so my little animation there for those of you that love animation. So Germany invading Poland September 1st, 1939. This officially marks the beginning of World War II. And then on September 3rd, Britain and France are going to declare war on Germany, is right where we left off. So now we're into Germany's conquest, 1939 to 1941. And so they're going to begin attacking Poland. They're going to try to learn lessons from the past. So they had seen in World War I that trench warfare, that wasn't successful. You weren't gaining anything. And so they're going to come up with this new technology, this technique called blitzkrieg or lightning war, which is just a super fast, coordinated attack. And it's a new form of warfare that is going to be used by Germany to quickly defeat an enemy by poking a hole in enemy lines and cutting off those lines from the rear, thus surrounding the enemy. So then you could come in and you could pounce on them. They're going to use this coordinated attack on one part of the enemy line with Air Force, tanks, and artillery. So it's everything you have all at once is blitzkrieg, which translates to mean lightning war, as it says on the screen there. And so developed by the Germans, who are, trying to learn from the past. And so you can see all the pictures changing here, tanks, everything. So blitzkrieg, we're going to see, does work. This strategy to avoid trench warfare in World War II, Poland's going to be defeated in less than a month. And they probably could have taken it over in lesser time, but they get a little distracted by starting to commit atrocities against the Jewish population. Remember that Jewish question? So they're slowed down. This fast technique would have gone even more quickly, less than a month, if they hadn't started to stop and kill Jews for that Lesenbrom. So what do you do if you want the land? You get rid of the people that are on that land, and of course the Jewish question. And so England and France, when this happens, says you have 2 days to withdraw Germany or we'll declare war. So on September 1st, we had the invasion. September 3rd, the beginning of World War II. And then also a partition is going to occur when the USSR attacks from the east. Remember that pact that the Soviets have with the Germans now, and so Stalin's going to invade Finland in 1939. And the USSR will be the only nation to ever be kicked out of the League of Nations, because they're going to begin annexing Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, just like they've been promised in that pact, to create a buffer zone against Germany. And they really do think, like we said about this pact, that Hitler really was going to be aiming for them, even though there's not aggression now. So they're trying to create this buffer. And then we're just going to have this blitzkrieg and then nothing. We're going to have a sitzkrieg, or what is known as a phony war after Poland. So we go fast, 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 and then sit, sit, sit. So we're going to have a 7-month lull that ensues after the blitzkrieg on Poland, causing some to say that World War II was a myth. So if you weren't there, you'd be like, oh, that's just, between Germany and Poland. This isn't going to spread. And so people start to get the idealism of this isn't going to happen. And the world just kind of sits and waits to see where Hitler might strike next. But England and France have a feeling exactly where he's going to strike. And so they start mobilizing their troops. The French are going to line up in Belgium, and they're not going to learn so much from the past. They're going to start, building some trenches on the border of France. And so we're going to see that the French and British, not so much, they don't think this is a myth. They see where Hitler's going, but the rest of the world kind of maybe this will just play out. He'll just take Poland and he'll I don't know why people always thought that Hitler would stop, because he doesn't. In 1940, after this kind of 7-month lull or sit, Hitler's going to begin moving again in April. And he is going to start by invading Denmark and Norway to the north. And then 1 month later, in May, he is going to begin invading the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. And so they will also fall to Germany. So he's going to start taking over everything. And so you can see from that map there that everything in orange was the German Reich, or the German Empire as it's building now. And so 1940, turning his attention to the north with the map there and the blitzkrieg technique. So within a month, taking all of these. And then, so France has been mobilizing, and they think they're ready. But the Blitzkrieg comes at them really fast and hard, and they're going to just keep like backing up. So by June, we're going to have Hitler coming for France. France had, was not surprised. They've been preparing for this, but they're not ready for the Blitzkrieg. Remember, they hadn't really learned their lesson with trench warfare, and so they are building these trenches. And so they're going to get pushed up to the English Channel in a city called Dunkirk, and thousands of French and British soldiers will be trapped on the beaches of France. But this is what's going to be called, from the movie Atonement, it actually shows this beach of Dunkirk, and this is going to be called the Miracle at Dunkirk, because before the Germans can come in for the kill, thousands, 300,000 exactly, French and British troops will be evacuated by British vessels. And so before they can be wiped out by the Germans, they're going to be rescued. This is a miracle at Dunkirk, and they'll live to fight another day. So this is really important. Because the Germans were in for the kill. They were ready to kill all these, and 300,000 soldiers will be saved to fight again. And so within 6 weeks, there will be the fall of France, except for this southern part of France. So Vichy France is going to be created by Hitler at this time. It's named for the city Vichy that's in the south. It's going to be not taken because Hitler doesn't want to waste his time subduing all of France. He wants to keep moving on. He wants to keep on with his blitzkrieg, and he has his eyes on Britain. So only about 2/3 of France is taken over at this time, and what's going to be created in the southern part that's not taken over is this puppet government. So like, a puppet, Hitler's, like pulling the strings, and so southern France becomes this puppet, and their leader is actually going to be a gentleman by the name of Marshal Henri Philippe Pétain. And so here's Pétain in the bottom corner here talking to Hitler, and so he becomes Hitler's puppet. But he had been a hero in World War I at the Battle of Verdun, and he was fighting against the Germans, and now he's in the service of the Germans. And Hitler's whole goal here is to incorporate the French into the Reich. He sees them, as a little more superior than Slavs and Jews, and so he really wants to just incorporate them. And, Pétain gets a bad rap here, but he's going to say he just really wanted to prevent more bloodshed, like maybe by being, the puppet under Hitler, he can prevent that. But then on the other side of that, he's also going to send hundreds of thousands of French into slave labor. He's going to also deport the Jews. I don't know if that's trying to keep his own head on his own shoulders. But your notes say here that he will later be executed for treason, but actually he will be sentenced for treason, which would be death. But he's like 84 years old, you can tell from this picture, when he's put in charge of this puppet government. And so he's so old, they're just pretty much like life in prison, and he'll die of old age in prison. And so Hitler just mainly does this, you need to know, because he's turning his eyes towards Britain. Vichy France will eventually be taken over completely by Germany later in the war, so all of France will be under Germany. But at the beginning, we're going to have this puppet government. And while there's northern France that's been taken and southern France has become a puppet government, there will be a Free French movement started to try to lead a resistance and get France back, and it will be led by General Charles de Gaulle, who will flee to Britain during France's fall and will try to control this resistance from there. And he will later become the president of France after the war. And so we will have this movement to try, and it will be directed from Britain. I'll come back to that at a later time. And so now that Hitler's got France subdued and he's turning his attention towards Britain, we're going to get the Tripartite Pact in 1940. So Germany's going to get a new ally at this point. Japan is going to be added to the Rome-Berlin axis, and so tripart means 3. And so we're going to now have the Rome-Berlin Tokyo axis, and so now Japan is coming in to add some support to the Rome-Berlin axis, and this is going to allow Hitler to then reach his goal of turning his eyes towards Britain. And so now we have this great visual, if I can get my slide to stay, of Hitler with his like barbed wire tentacles reaching everywhere but Britain. So now turning his attention towards Great Britain as his next blitzkrieg action. And so Britain knows Hitler's coming because he has the coastline of France and Belgium. So I mean, it's just kind of like in 1807 when Britain is the only nation left to stand up to the rest of Europe, or Germany, just like they had faced Napoleon, except for neutral Switzerland. Hitler lets Switzerland stay neutral. They're special, they're fascist. Anyway, so except for Switzerland. So the Battle of Britain is going to become one of the most critical battles of the war. Hitler is actually going to offer Britain peace, though, if it accepted Germany's control of Western Europe. If it says, yeah, Hitler, we accept that you have the control of all that, because I think Hitler never really wanted to take the British. He saw them as the most close ethnically to the Germans, or what he would call the Aryan race. So he's going to try to give them an out here. But our new British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, who has now replaced Chamberlain that we talked about last class, flatly refuses. He had been that critic. He had been the one like, yeah, Chamberlain, I would not keep giving stuff to Hitler. Not a good idea. He's going to say that, even if we have to fight this will be our finest hour. We'll fight them here. We'll fight them there. We'll fight them everywhere. He wasn't quite as Dr. Seuss in his speech as I am doing him justice here. But it's the duty of the British to defeat the tyranny of Adolf Hitler, and he will not give in. He will not accept Hitler's terms here. And he is going to actually turn to neutral United States for armament. But we are very neutral at this time, very isolationist. We have all kinds of nationalities in our border. And so, we're going to stay out, but we're starting to realize that this is going to spread and that we might not be able to stay out. And so we're going to see in this lecture that we'll start to help a bit, although it'll be very slow, our aid, because we're really trying to stay out. There's still critics that say we should have never gotten involved in World War I. And so Hitler, being refused by Churchill, is going to then plan a massive German invasion of England, and he's going to call this Operation Sea Lion. But before he is going to, launch some ground troops into Britain, he's going to decide he needs to kind of soften Britain up a little bit. And so how Hitler plans to soften or weaken Britain is by sending in August of 1940 the Luftwaffe, led by Hermann Göring, one of Hitler's inner circle, sending them in to destroy the Royal Air Force, or the RAF, and he thinks that by doing this it'll open him up to being able to set in motion a ground invasion. But Britain is going to effectively use a new technology called the radar to detect Germany's air attacks, so they know where they're coming across the English Channel before they get there. And also, Britain at this time is going to break the German code called the Enigma, but they're going to keep this, like, nobody at this time will know that they've been able to do that. So they are breaking the code, but they never tell anyone. So they know, further down, I'm pretty sure the Germans are like, how do they always know what we're doing? But they keep it such top secret that with the use of radar and being able to intercept these codes, they're able to prevent Germany from being effective in these attacks. If at the beginning of the movie Pearl Harbor, which if you've watched it, you've watched it, and you don't have to watch it for the whole love story. In the beginning, Ben Affleck is, he wants to become a fighter, and so he's over actually helping in this battle. So there's a little, context. Very cinematic film. There's not much of it other than a couple parts you could relate here accurately. And so Hitler's only able to take out 1/3 as many planes of the British as the British are able to take out of the Luftwaffe. And so after almost destroying the RAF, like if he had kept going, Hitler kind of changes his course here and orders the bombing of London, or the bombing of cities. This is going to be called the Blitz. And it is probably Hitler's going to make some errors, but this is a fatal error when it comes to Britain, because he focused on cities and civilians rather than focusing on cities with industry and military resources. And that's what you want to attack if you're trying to take someone out militarily. And so this becomes a fatal error because the RAF, or the Royal Air Force, is going to recover and ultimately defeat the Luftwaffe. And so that's going to force Hitler to call off the invasion of Britain in September. And so Hitler has to call off this invasion. Germany will lose 2,433 planes, while the Royal Air Force will only lose 900. However, the Blitz will continue until May 1941. He just won't be able to put all of his resources at Britain like he had. The significance of this fatal error, is that his real focus in all of this, like I'd said, is not taking over Britain. He saw them, as kind of equals in ethnicity. But even though he'd had this non-aggression pact, his real focus this whole time has been the USSR. He wants Lebensraum. So just like Napoleon, he wants to turn to the east to get this land. And so the significance of having to call this off with Britain without defeating them is he will now have to guard against a future two-front war because he doesn't eliminate the threat to the west. And D-Day, as we'll see as we get to the end of the war in 1944, will be launched from Britain, which would not have been able to happen if he would have been successful in this raid. And so we're going to see that he does, the worst thing you can do is leave himself faced with a two-front war later. And so now on to the German invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941. Hitler had all along, just as I said, even with the non-aggression pact, had always planned on invading Russia to fulfill his dream as Lebensraum, or this living space in the East. And he'd said it in Mein Kampf. So just a reminder to read and never to come back and say, I didn't know that. I mean, the Soviet Union in the back of their minds, Stalin's always known. But anyway, this is going to constitute Hitler's greatest blunder. So while it was a grave error in the Battle of Britain with the Blitz in London, this is his greatest blunder. He's going to go back on his promise. Remember, it had been a 10-year non-aggression pact, so he breaks his promise here, and he is going to move to the east and start to tackle the USSR. And this is political cartoons, my favorite. Stab in the back, forgive me, comrade, but it seemed like such a good opportunity. And then, the holding of the non-aggression pact here. And so very reminiscent of the political cartoons we looked at earlier with Stalin and Hitler, but this time the knives are actually in the back. And so Hitler's going to call this invasion Operation Barbarossa as he moves to the east into the USSR. I mean, Hitler really needed to take AP Euro. He would have known that this is not a good idea, but he not have taken AP Euro thinks this will be a 6-week victory that he will take the USSR. And so Stalin, being the man we know he is, we know he doesn't care about millions of his own people dying, is going to order a scorched earth policy, which means that Soviets will destroy anything of value as they withdrew to deprive the German army of resources. So they're backing up but burning everything the Germans are going to come across. This is a huge deal to the Germans and their blitzkrieg strategy, because if you're a blitzkrieg, you're not bringing a lot of stuff with you. You're moving fast, fast, fast. And so they had planned to live off of the land. And so this is going to devastate them. And thousands of towns in the USSR are going to be destroyed or disappear. The Germans are also going to be slowed down because they're distracted with killing. Remember, Lebensraum, you want to get rid of all of the people, so they get caught up in stopping to kill all of these Slavs and Jewish people. They're like, oh, Jews are in USSR too. And so that slows them down as well. But by winter, the Germans were at the gates of Moscow while laying siege to Leningrad. Remember, that had been what was St. Petersburg, but named in honor of Leningrad. And it will last 2 years, so definitely not quick, definitely not blitzkrieg. And in the USSR, World War II will become known as the Great Patriotic War of the Fatherland. And so there's that there's right there under, that's what he always promoted, Stalin, like, we are protecting the fatherland, whatever costs that it takes, because people loved him there for whatever reason, killing millions of his own people. But anyway, on a side note, we need to come into then what the Great Britain is doing now that the Blitz has failed, and then what are we, the United States, doing? And so the British, just having, some of the Blitz is still going on, is going to say, we need your help, United States. And so Winston Churchill, and our president, Franklin Roosevelt, are going to meet secretly after the invasion of the Soviet Union starts, because I think in the back of our mind, Roosevelt really knows that we're going to be in this war, and so wanting to start to meet and put some terms there. And so they meet in a boat off of Newfoundland in the Atlantic, and this is going to be called the Atlantic Charter in August 1941. And the agreement here is really, like, we're not even in the war yet, but what should the world look like after this war? Pretty presumptuous, after the Axis powers were defeated, we're going to say that there should be no territorial changes contrary to the wishes of inhabitants or self-determination. So this should sound very familiar to, like, what Woodrow Wilson wanted after World War I, but we're like, oh, we kind of screwed that up. We can do it better. We won't just draw arbitrary lines and make people live by this. So we need to do this better. We realize it's one of the reasons we're not in the war yet, but probably going to end up in. It's also going to call for a permanent system of general security, which will later become as the United Nations. So it's just like what Woodrow Wilson had wanted with the League, but going to be better, because we realized the League really, there's not even terms for how poorly it was executed and how it hadn't prevented how it hadn't accomplish the collective security. So they're going to try for a better permanent system of general security. And then Stalin is going to endorse the agreement soon after, which is kind of weird because are Great Britain and USSR friends? No. Or the USSR and the United States friends? No. But it's kind of like the enemy of my enemy kind of situation. However, the United States is still military neutral, even though they're mean from this. Those neutrality laws of the 1930s are still in effect. And so I really believe that Roosevelt knew that we were going to end up in this war, but the Neutrality Acts in the 1930s are going to prevent him from drawing the United States into the conflict earlier to kind of get things, launched right here. But he is going to be able to pass the Lend-Lease Act of 1941, which is going to give large amounts of money and supplies to help Britain and the Soviets. And this really, it effectively ends U.S. neutrality without declaring war. I mean, because now the Germans know what side we're going to be on. And so they're starting, because how do you get supplies there? You have to send them on ships. They're starting to sink some of our ships taking supplies. And so really we're in an undeclared naval war with Germany at this time. But then what's going to happen, you wouldn't think that this is how the war was going to start from what we've talked, but instead, not Germany, but the Japanese are going to attack Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, resulting in the United States official entry into the war. And why they're doing this is because we've been like, oh, bad Japan, smack on the wrist for the raping of Nanking and invading Manchuria. So we had embargoed oil from them, and they need it. And so they're going to attack us, trying to make sure that they can procure oil and have, stop our embargo and get to other areas with, in terms of getting oil. And so here's just, of course, an image that I'm sure you've seen in U.S. World as well, but the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. And so what's Hitler do? I mean, really, he could have stayed out of it. We hadn't declared war on him. We were an undeclared naval war. He could have just stayed out of it, but Hitler declares war on the United States on December 11th, which proves to be another fatal blunder. Because he's really drawing us in where our attention might have just been focused on Japan. But instead of focusing on Japan, who had attacked the United States along with Britain will now, instead of focusing all of their attention and all of their resources on defeating Germany first, and we'll worry about those Japanese later. And so now we'll see the Grand Alliance formed in 1942, which will consist of Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States, as well as 24 other countries united against Hitler. Germany, essentially, Italy, and Japan. So sometimes it's referred to as United Nations against Hitler, but also the Grand Alliance, and it'll be formed in 1942. Okay, so now turn our attention to the Nazi Empire in Europe. Everything in red here is the Nazi Empire, or the German victories by the end of 1941. So you see that they have everything but Switzerland, which Hitler decides to leave alone, but also all of these areas down in Africa. Why Africa? Because oil, because Germany wants to be able to get there and get natural supplies. That's part of Lebensraum as well. You need all of the economic value there to be exploited to help your empire. And you can read through all of the parts that that Germany, the Nazi Empire, takes over there. And so, like I said, why take all of this stuff? They need to exploit it for its economic value. However, Hitler is going to be a little bit nicer to the Nordic people, such as the Dutch, the Norwegians, and the Danes, because he sees them as racially related to the Germans, so they're going to get preferential treatment. However, Hitler is going to heavily tax the French, as they were seen as inferior Latin people, but they will be tolerated as a race. By tolerated, I mean they're better than the Slavs and Jews, so they just get heavier taxes. And then the Slavs in Eastern Europe are going to be seen as subhuman. And Hitler's going to seize men and women for slave labor to work in German factories. It's kind of like, is that really that great of an idea? I mean, how hard are you going to work if you're enslaved? Like, I'm going to put this one bullet in here instead of these 10, then I could get in this. Yeah, but he thinks that if they're being enslaved, they'll be forced to die out. You can kind of read through the rest there. And so the last little part we have in this section is the Holocaust. We left off with the Jewish question. We left off with the harassment Hitler's first answer to the Jewish question. Maybe if I just harass them, they'll all leave. But countries had stopped accepting Jews, or stopped Jews from coming in, even the United States. And so Hitler in 1942 is still left with what to do with the rest of these Jewish people. And so that's going to lead us into the Holocaust. And so Hitler's final solution to the Jewish problem, or the Jewish question, will begin in late 1941. His formal plan will come at the Wannsee Conference in 1942. And this is where death camps will begin to be built in Poland, in addition to hundreds of concentration camps. So they serve different purposes. Some were work camps, some were specifically nothing but for death of Jews, and Auschwitz is the most notorious of these. I'm going to link a Remember the Camp video, which is an awesome account of this time period. We just don't have time to go into something. The Holocaust is something you're very familiar with. But remember, 6 million Jews will be killed, approximately 2/3 of the pre-war Jewish population, and then between 5 to 6 million others murdered that we talked about earlier, including political prisoners, Jehovah's Witnesses, gypsies, gays, lesbians, undesirables, etc. And for the sake of time, since we don't go into all of the nitty-gritty, but really the causes and the turning points and the social outcomes, there were some underground movements that sprang up and increased during the war, such as sabotaging Nazi supplies, supplying allies like spies, supplying the allies with valuable information, etc. But now to what AP Euro really focuses on, turning points in the war. Okay, so turning points of the war, this is what AP Euro is really concerned with, all the battles and stuff you got in AP US. So, turning points of the war, we have what is known as Alamein in November 1942. So what's happening is the Germans have conquered most of North Africa, like we saw on that map in the red, and they've been led by a German general, Erwin Rommel, who gets the nickname the Desert Fox. And now the Italians are going to come down into northern Africa, because, you know, the Germans have been there, but things are going so well, so we're going to bring the Italians down in there. And why is it so important to have this area to hold it is because you can bounce into Europe from this area and also get a lot of supplies like we've talked about in raw materials. So anyway, by November, let's look at big strategy here. So we're in the war now. So you have the Allies. What's their big strategy? The first is they want to clear the Nazis out of North Africa. Because remember, we focused our attention on Germany first, and we'll deal with those Japanese later. But so how do we get to Hitler and Germany? How do we get to our big question dealing with Germany and Hitler? Stalin has a plan. He wants the Allies to go across the English Channel from Britain into France and defeat the Germans in France. Why? Because he wants Hitler to face a two-front war. He wants Hitler's troops and resources to be divided. But Winston Churchill, our new Prime Minister of Britain, wants to attack what he would call the soft underbelly of Europe, or the sensitive, weak part. And he would say that this is Italy, because Italy doesn't have that good of an army, and they sent resources down to North Africa. And so if you take Italy, then you can travel all the way up Italy to Germany. And Stalin doesn't want this. He wants a two-front war, but Churchill's going to be able to convince FDR to first tackle the soft underbelly. But to get to the soft underbelly, you're going to have to clear the Nazis out of Germany. So, you know, blah, blah, blah. The Allies are going to defeat the German forces in the battle called El Alamein. And so successful at El Alamein, we're going to be able to drive the Germans out of Egypt and push them westward across North Africa. And this is where we'll get to our next tactic called Operation Torch in November of 1942. And so this Operation Torch will take place at during the same time, November 1942. So U.S. and British forces will land on the beaches of Morocco and Algeria and engage the retreating German forces from Egypt. And the Desert Fox's troops will be surrounded by the Allied armies and defeated by May of 1943. And this will completely remove the Germans from Africa, while suffering massive casualties and prisoners of war. And so that first step of the plan being completed, what are the Allies going to do? Now we're going to move towards that soft underbelly, now towards Italy. And so now everything's looking good with Churchill's plan of the underbelly of Italy, except Hitler realizes that Italy isn't that great of an ally, and they're not going to be able to hold their own. So he sends his own troops and resources to Italy, and this is going to slow us down. So now we're going to have to spend about 18 months trying to slog up Italy. And so it slows us down, but it's going to effectively knock Mussolini out of the war, and we're going to see that we're going to launch some other big strategies simultaneously with the attacks that are going on in Italy. So you have Turning Point Alamein gets the German forces out of Egypt, and then Operation Torch gets Italy and Germany out of northern Africa, and then moving on to the next turning point. And so if you remember, Hitler had invaded Russia, and what's the policy of the Russians? A scorched earth policy. So we have them backing up, backing up, backing up. It's called Operation Barbarossa. If you remember that map I showed you with the arrows of Hitler's movement in Operation Barbarossa, they're kind of moving in all directions, and they've sieged Moscow and Leningrad, but they're not, they're only laying siege. They're not really getting anything done. And so Hitler says, I want to focus on a city in the south, and so he's going to turn his attention towards Stalingrad. And so why does Hitler want Stalingrad? Because there's oil there. Remember, it's the doorway to the Caucasus Mountains, still a lot of oil there. And so, what's Stalin going to say? He's going to say, no way, this city's named after me. There's no way that you are going to take it. I will defend it at all costs. And so Hitler sends 500,000 troops into Stalingrad. And Germans had actually taken most of the city when a Russian counterattack is going to come, and the Germans will eventually become surrounded by the Soviet forces. And so Hitler's going to have a decision to make. And so Hitler's decision is that he refuses to allow the German forces to surrender, and thus a bulk of the German army in Stalingrad, 300,000 men, or the bulk of his German army in the east, will be destroyed in the battle, which is why this is a turning point. And so if you remember the Battle of Dunkirk, what the French and British had done, they had retreated. They had saved the lives of 300,000 troops to fight another day. And Hitler probably should have learned from this, because his troops don't get a chance to fight another day. And so this is in 1943, and because those troops are decimated, after the battle, the Soviets will begin the 2.5-year campaign of pushing the German army back towards Germany, towards Berlin, which is why this is a turning point. This is where the momentum in the East is lost by the Germans. Okay, so next turning point. Hitler knows someday the United States and Great Britain are going to come across the English Channel. So he has been fortifying the entire coast. But still, this is new. Like, no one has ever attacked Europe by sea like we're getting ready to. And so the United States and Britain are going to try to launch an attack, or going to launch an attack on Europe. So they're going to try to go across the English Channel through France to get to Germany. However, if you're fighting a two-front war, the one advantage you do have, like Germany has, is the mobility. You have the railroads and fast movement to get supplies quickly to where you need them, because you're central. And so really the only way to overcome the benefit that the Germans have right here is for the United States and Britain to fake Germany out. And so what the United States and British are going to do is they're going to start to kind of play this like psych Germany out game. And so what would be like the best or most obvious spot, or most logical spot, I shouldn't say obvious, logical spot to cross the English Channel would be the narrowest spot. And this is a spot known as Calais. And so we're going to start to play this game with Germany. Like, we're going to let them listen in, and we're going to be like, we're going to Calais, and start playing this game of psych out. And so continue to try to fake them out. We even build like cardboard and wood, like fake tape. So when the planes are going over, like, oh, they are going to cross there. And so trying to avert that this is where all of the action is going to be. And this operation is going to be known as D-Day, June 6, 1944, or Operation Overlord. And so on the day that we're supposed to invade Calais, actually the Allied troops bombard the coast of Normandy, which Hitler has he has fortified the coast, but they're expecting us at Calais, and they have all these like little cement pillboxes, and they're ready to mow us down as we cross the English Channel. This is Saving Private Ryan is about this, about D-Day. But anyway, so one German sentry or a guard sees all of these ships. Like, there's 10,000 aircraft, 4,000 ships, 20,000 troops coming at him, and he's like, it's like a floating city coming at him. And the Allied forces invade the beaches of Normandy with all these arrows here, instead of, like we had said or had been assumed, Calais. I mean, before we move on right here with this turning point, I just want you to imagine, like, if Hitler had been successful in the Battle of Britain, like this would have never happened because he would have controlled both Britain and France. So that's why that was one of his really, not the only, but one of his huge mistakes is still allowing Britain to not be under his control. And so now what have we established because of, Hitler's blunder with the Battle of Britain and our fake out with the assault on Normandy? We have established a Western Front, which is why this is going to be listed as a turning point. Okay, so why it's a turning point in the war, a Western Front is established. It will spell the end of Nazi domination of Europe, which is why this is a major turning point. Paris will be liberated by the Allies 1 month later, and Hitler is really now fighting. I mean, if he was worried about a two-front war, he's now fighting on three fronts, or a three-front war. In the east against the Russians, and the west against the United States and Britain and France, and in Italy against the United States and Britain. And by the fall of 1944, the Allied troops who have liberated Paris have now moved through the rest of France and are going to reach the German border and begin preparing an invasion of Germany. Okay, so we're coming in from the west, and remember the Germans are being pushed back from Russia, and so now Hitler and the Germans are being squeezed, and Hitler is going to get desperate. And so our next turning point is Hitler gets desperate. He's going to decide to do one last offensive to try to drive the Allies away as we're pushing towards the western German border. He's going to decide to try to push back. So the Battle of the Bulge in December of 1944 is named because the line, as you're going to see in my next slide, is actually going to bulge. Okay, so why it's called the Battle of the Bulge is because the Germans are actually going to be able to push the Allies back into France and Belgium, but it's short-lived because we're going to push right back, so the bulging of the line, and get into Germany. So it's ultimately a failure for Hitler, but kind of successful at the beginning. And where's Hitler now? He's all holed up in his bunker. I don't think I have a picture of his bunker, maybe in just a little bit of him holed up, but he's still like thinking, we can do this. So, I mean, there's confidence for you right there. But, I mean, in reality, that's confidence or craziness. But in reality, who are the people left fighting for Germany, for Hitler? Because, I mean, the cream of his crop is dead. He didn't get them out to fight another day in Stalingrad. And so who we have left are the Hitler youth, kids, and the elderly. Okay, so what happens? Cream of the crop is gone. Hitler, like I said, is in his bunker under the Reichstag building. And there with him are Goebbels, remember the propaganda minister that we talked about. And he's there with his wife and like his 6 kids. But anyway, so Hitler is paranoid. He always wants word of what's going on. And so he gets word that Himmler, his right-hand guy, his SS guy, is going to surrender. He gets this news. And he thought that Himmler was his best follower, that the SS is his trusted group, and he explodes in a fit of rage. And this is where you kind of get that don't shoot the messenger thing, because he takes the messenger who he's asked to bring him messages outside the bunker and shoots him. I think this is where even the phrase comes from. But shoots the messenger, goes into a fit of rage. And so then on April 28th, Hitler is going to marry his longtime mistress, Eva Braun. There's some videos of this happening. And then, I mean, now that confidence is gone, he's going to test his cyanide tablets on his dog. So boom, guess that works. Cyanide works. He knows the end is coming. So he tests the cyanide on his dog on April 29th. And then he gets, the secured word or the final word that no more troops are left to come to Berlin to protect the city. I mean, it's just the kids and the elderly. And then he also receives the word on April 29th that Mussolini and his mistress have been captured and shot and hung and beat outside of a gas station, hung upside down, like I told you. And so on April 30th, Hitler, he's pretty much, telling people that, he's going to kill himself, says that, I want my body to be burned so I do not face the humiliation that Mussolini did at the hands of his people. And he's going to say his farewells like, goodbye, Goebbels and your 6 kids. And then he's going to shoot his mistress, now wife, and himself on April 30th of 1945. And then supposedly the next day, but who's there? No, No, the bodies, or his body, is carried up and supposedly burned outside of the Reichstag. And then Goebbels, the propaganda minister, is going to, he and his wife are going to commit suicide. I mean, there you go, loyal followers, that's dedicated. And their 6 kids that had been there are going to be poisoned. And then on May 4th, supposedly the Soviets are going to find the bodies of Hitler and his dedicated followers. But I don't know. Did they? Fake death? I don't know. I mean, wouldn't that be crazy if it was a huge conspiracy? Like a Machiavellian sort of thing? Like, yeah, my body was burned, whatever. But anyway, and so then the next turning point, then May 8th, 1945 is our next point, now that Hitler and his loyal followers and the children are out of the picture. And so then May 8th, 1945, Hitler's gone, as I said. Germany is going to surrender. And this is going to become known as VE Day, or Victory Over Europe Day. So remember, our first goal had been to defeat Germany and then worry about the Japanese. So VE Day, everybody's all happy, all celebrating. But the end of the war against Japan is going to, a few months later, is going to end differently in August of 1945. And so what we have been doing in our attacks on Japan, or dealing with Japan, is we've kind of been what is known as the island hopping strategy. So we were hopping from island to island with ground attacks, and then we were planning a ground invasion of Japan. But there have been huge death tolls as we've been doing this, because the Japanese have this code of Bushido, so death before surrender. And so we've gotten to the, and you remember APUS, you've had all of these battles in detail, but we just look at it as a turning point in the end of our war with Japan. But so we've gotten to the Battle of Okinawa, and then there's this huge fear that it's going to be this incredibly long, huge death toll. I think estimated 1 million deaths if we do accomplish the ground attack on Japan. And the estimate is that if 1 million allies are going to die, even more Japanese are going to die. And so there's a conference we're going to talk about later, but then it says someone at this conference leans over and whispers in the president's ear, there's this new weapon called the atomic bomb that they've been testing in New Mexico. And so then the first atomic bomb is going to be the Trinity. I don't know if you play Call of Duty like my husband, but in the portion called Nuketown, there's a street called Trinity. So that's the first one we drop on, and drop on Hiroshima. But the Japanese still don't surrender. So then a few days later, we drop an atomic bomb on Nagasaki, and then they are going to surrender. And so with the second atomic bomb, then Japan surrenders, although the emperor was allowed to remain on the throne. This will equal VJ Day, or Victory Over Japan Day. And so in class, we are going to finish up diplomacy during the war, because it's always my review section of what was going on socially. That'll take us probably less than 11 minutes. And then we are going to cover Unit 10.3 together. Your homework for the weekend is going to be Unit 10.4 and our practice exam. And that is the end, guys. So I know it's feeling rough right now. That is the end of curriculum. After this weekend, we are just into review and practicing in class and comprehensive exam and finishing your awesome final videos.